trying to make sure it doesn't get caught in my hoops. My name's Victoria. A lot of my friends call me Vic. I'm a junior environmental science and geography major from Southern California, but I'm originally from New York City, where my tribe is based out of. I am a member of the Montaukett Indian Nation, which is also like a subset of like tribes part of the Shinnecock Nation, and that's based off of like Long Island, New York. As someone like who is technically like mixed race, my mom is white and my dad is half black and half Native American. I like go back and forth on this really, like like I feel like biracial doesn't necessarily like encompass like everything that I am, because it's not always like split down the middle. So like I go back and forth between like multiracial, like mix, but like I feel like the side of me that like I identify with most is like my Native American heritage. Typically I'm like racially like ambiguous to like most people, so it's a lot. I grew up with a lot of like, what are you, like where are you really from? And I feel like at Villanova I still receive that question of like, what are you, only it's a little bit more like targeted at like admissions, because there are a lot of like misconceptions with affirmative action and people receiving scholarships just because you're Indigenous, when that's not necessarily true. In terms of like representation, I feel like Native American history is something that's usually like glossed over. Like pay like respect to the fact that there were people here before like the colonists or the colonies were here, but like that's kind of it. You don't go over like the Trail of Tears, you don't go over like the genocide of Native American men, women, and children, and you don't go over the fact that all of those actions back in like the 16th, 17th century are the reasons why Native Americans or people of Indigenous descent today are still like systematically oppressed. I feel like I am used to being like the only one, in the sense like growing up I was usually one of the few like POCs like in the classroom. I'm kind of like adapted to that fact, if like that makes any sense, but like just because like I grew up with it and have like learned to like cope with it over time, like doesn't change the fact that it is very isolating, that there's just not a lot of Indigenous representation. An alumni like reached out to me like a few days ago, and she's like, it's so healing to see more Indigenous representation, and she like graduated back in like 2000, so just the fact that there hasn't been anyone from my background here, or at least like that I know of over like the last like 18 years, is very disheartening. Like, what plan do you have in mind to make campus feel more inclusive and not so isolating? And so I feel like part of that starts like in the classroom. I don't know, like I only have to take like 2 history classes like as a STEM major, but I have not seen one focusing on Native American history, and I don't understand like how you cannot do that, considering one, Villanova is on Native American land, and again, it's a part that's very like glossed over. Like there's also like a physical space, and also just having like funds and like money being directed towards those initiatives so you can create the support systems for POCs. It took a whole pandemic to get people to realize that the Navajo reservation in Nevada and Arizona has limited access to resources, and that's why they were a COVID hotspot to begin with. I wish it didn't take a pandemic and like a summer of like racial like injustice to make people realize like, oh shoot, like all these issues are happening to like a lot of groups like in this country. In terms of me, a lot of like, again, like my decisions and like the person I am today like stems out of being Native American, but it also like stems out of being raised by my grandmother, who is full blood like Montaukett Indian, and I guess like in the way that like she lived like her life to be like kind to everyone, and like part of that was like learned like through growing up in the Montaukett Indian Nation. Like I stem to like put that in like my like everyday life. But again, like I would love to see like more like representation, POC representation at Villanova like as a whole, but just like to have like one other like person on campus from Indigenous background like would be great. And I feel like part of it like comes from acknowledging the fact that like as a PWI, this maybe was not like the first like priority over the last couple of years. It's time to make DEI initiatives a top priority on campus, and I hope to see that more going into my senior year.